University in Perth have taken a fresh approach to punching the numbers, and their results may surprise you. I'm joined by economics lecturer SherryBawa. SherryBawa, I'm very interested that you've tried to put some numbers on something that's very difficult to quantify, a very subjective, very slippery issue.
We basically try to look at a different perspective of measuring the cost of raising children, because if you look at the figures that exist in Australia, they really panic you up, and you really get scared of planning a child if you look at those figures, because those figures suggest that you need to have $20,000 a year to spend on a child in your family. And we really wanted to give a different perspective of measuring the cost of children by ultimately looking at the impact of the children on the wealth accumulation, because we are also trying to measure the financial burden of having children on your wealth accumulation, and our results show that with the presence of a child, it only makes you worse off by $2,000 a year as compared to the same family household with no kids, basically.
And you've reached these numbers based on varying metrics, because on one measure you measure the actual spending, how much a family actually spends raising a child, and the other model is about forecasting how much you would normally expect to spend on raising a child.
No, basically our approach is different to these two, because what you actually spend, definitely we agree to that, okay, this is what you actually spend, and you can consider that as a cost of child. But what we are looking at is, after spending so much, whatever figures you are suggesting, so what happens ultimately to your wealth accumulation? Because if you're spending $20,000 extra on a child, then it must affect your wealth accumulation over the long run time period. And I believe that if you're spending that much of money, that it will make you worse off as compared to people with no kids. So it's a different perspective. We are not measuring the actual money spent or the needed to be spent on children, but we are actually measuring, after doing everything, what happens to your wealth accumulation. And that is not a very panicking figure, basically.
How reliable is that measure of wealth accumulation? Because certainly a lot of people, it seems to me at least, would choose to forego lifestyle comforts over sacrificing their wealth accumulation program that they expect to save for retirement, for university for their children, for instance.
Can you repeat the question, please?
What I'm asking you is, how reliable is this wealth accumulation figure? Is it enough to look at the end figure and say that, you know, raising a child doesn't affect you, when what happens in between is a lot of lifestyle sacrifices that are made to keep that wealth accumulation program going?
We definitely don't want to claim it as an approach that can substitute expenditure, a budget standard approach that normally is being used since ages. But definitely this approach, if you follow this approach, it raises a question like, if it ultimately doesn't affect your wealth accumulation, that means we can assume that your well-being is no lower than as compared to when you were not having children. So it's definitely not an approach that can substitute the existing approaches, but definitely it could be used as a measure to raise the question. If you're spending so much on children, then it should make you worse off. But if you're basically substituting, and if you're changing your consumption behaviors, you're replacing your expensive holidays and going to restaurants with simple things like going to a park with your kids, and if it could give you equal level of utility, or if you feel the same level of satisfaction, then it shouldn't make you worse off. So it's basically you're trying to change your consumption patterns. Yes, you do make sacrifices for your children, but if in monetary terms, if it doesn't get reflected in your wealth accumulation, then it raises a question that whether they are very expensive as being claimed by different approaches.
Also in the study you point out that having children attracts some degree of financial benefit in terms of rebates and tax concessions from the government.
Yes, yes. We definitely want to make a point here that there is a limitation in the expenditure approach and other approaches that have been used, and the limitation is that they don't look at the income side of having children, because the presence of children would give you extra benefits as well, for example, social welfare payments or tax concessions. So those extra benefits that children bring in the family, they're not ever being considered in the expenditure or budget standard approaches, whereas in wealth approach, it ultimately includes the impact of every income side as well and the expenses side as well.
Right, SherryBawa, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.